Hi, welcome to Kelly Writer's House and the series Breaking Through, which I have been hosting Simone White at Kelly Writer's House for the last 2 years or so. At this series, normally under in-person circumstances, we invite poets and writers who are on the verge of publishing their first works or have just published their first works to come to Kelly Writer's House and read with us and talk with us about what it means to be a poet working right now. Um, in this new day, we're giving something new a try. We have the amazing poet Taylor Johnson here with us this evening, and the wonderful Sophia DeRose, who's known to many of you who are Mobco people and to everybody at Penn and everybody at the Writers House. We are working together on a collaborative reading and review of Taylor's new book, Inheritance, out right now or just this month from Alice
Yeah,
James.
last
Uh,
week. Yeah,
Last week, it's out, it's
yeah.
available for purchase. And congratulations, Taylor.
Thank
Um, Sophia and I have many things to say about the book, and we're working on printing those together. But in the meantime, she's going to introduce Taylor this afternoon, and we are going to have a great conversation after we hear Taylor read. So I'm going to turn this over to Sophia right now, and immediately following, Taylor's going to read, and then we're going to start our conversation. Welcome, everybody, virtually.
Yeah, hi everyone. As Simone just said, my name is Sophia. I'm a senior at Penn, and I'm a huge fan of this collection of poetry. So I'm just going to introduce it for a few minutes, and then we'll have the reading. Um, so there's a line in the collection. It says, "What gender should I be in this sound?" And I've never heard anyone ask a question like this, which makes me think it's a real question. And often in poetry, I feel weighed down by questions that get a poem from point A to point B. But in Inheritance, I feel like the questions are collapsing space and sound into one plane. And instead of guiding me from one vertex to the next, they configure into impossible structures and leave me not with answers, but in awe. And the wonderful thing about questions is the implied space after the question mark, the human halt after curious momentum. And as I read the poem containing continuity from this collection, implied and implanted space between stanzas, between pages, and between punctuation mimics to me the oscillation of how people reconcile closeness, distance, sameness, and difference. Inheritance declares its proximity to family in various valences, pessimistic and nostalgic, familiar and foreign, but always tethered to some lesson of self. And it's full of the kind of doubles that make you believe in language as the best approximation for this, when this is systematically and categorically different for all. Johnson has taken the principle that every force casts its equal but opposite into existence and made it real, visible, and legible through poetry. And I'm so happy to be here for this reading today. Thank you to everyone else who tuned in. So I'm going to turn it over to these lovely people now for the reading.
thank you so much, Sophia. That was incredible, and I know that our conversation after will be a lot of fun because yeah, that's really nice. Thank you so much, and thank you, Simone, for inviting me. Yeah, I'm gonna read some of these poems. This is Inheritance. Um, has a really beautiful photograph by the artist Dina Lawson on the cover, which is such a gift. Yeah, I'm just gonna read some poems, and then we can talk, which is this is great. Thank you. Since I quit that internet service, I'm thinking more about the transitive properties in books, the words, the palimpsest of images accruing in my brain, but more immediately the book in my hand, the cover worn at one end from sweat and gripping it when it comes close. Close as in when I stood up, let one deep exhale when I came to the lines of all fearless happiness from which reaches my life I sing and find it underlined by a beloved stranger. It's like turning the record over, knowing you're hearing what I'm hearing, easing up on the edge of the chair. It's like we're holding hands now, at the edge of a white silence from which we are to make a music of our being here, of being moved, wherein our music complements and holds close each other's sound in the wet room of the tree I met you in. Nothing is said about the water or the fearless trees angled toward and against the light that did fall on me, made much of me, light that sings through me. So I'm singing Nocturne. What was rampant in me was not wisteria, perhaps decay or loss of reflection. No one like me gets old, or so I thought, even as I watched the days fade into each other. Was I no one? Which phrase means a grown up girl, mica gilded, pure myth, gone. The row might say I was trying to find the door to nothingness, that the wild was already in me. However, I walked out my bed to find my skin only to return, moon drunk, bramble laden, stripped to sinew, a broken syntax. No denying how I got here. I lay down among the tall grass and came up a specter. I came up everywhere. Bolaño blued. The forest is bordered by the highway to the west and the railroad tracks to the east. Here, like a dead man, I never sleep. I'm the moon, soon the sea darkening in apology. My sickness is antithetical, my accomplice or attempt, pride, rage, violence. For a long time, I wondered what English meant, if it was worth its weight in enlightenment. Everything slow and asthmatic, everything disgustingly still, frozen somewhere in the air. Maybe that's why I can't express want I what, two words strung together. Maybe that's why I lived alone and did nothing for 3 years. Loneliness is an aspect of human authorization, verbal egotism. I write to understand stillness, not to praise. To name is to please, to keep awake. All please to the highway, swells, bursts. I'm going to show a film now. I'm going to show a film now, yesterday, to keep awake. I dreamed I lived inside the agitation of silence, a hollow building in Barcelona, the abandoned Mediterranean blue, a tree turning the lights on and off. Occasionally it shook, the monkey applauding in the corner. Fade to black. Everything gleams like the wind in the rocks. The sad stories I must tell you, the gesture that never came, the trigger pulled at the worst possible moment. Audience. I got something in my eye. My bad, yo. Um,
Take your time. While Taylor does that, you
oh,
know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna read your bio, which I forgot to do. Is that okay?
oh, yeah, thank
Your
you.
bio okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Taylor Johnson is from Washington, D.C. Their poems recently appear in the Paris Review, Academy of American Poets, and the Baffler. Their first book, Inheritance, will be published, etc., with Alice James Books just now. Okay, you all right?
Just now. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Mom. Um, yeah, I'll read a few more. Go Go Ode. O capacious room, give me your tongues. I'm done with being self possessed. Take hold, turn the river in me. I'm freed up to be anybody else. My molecules twinned with the sound. Oh, erotic hours pass me not. Keep me in the pocket. Oh, percussive descent devotion is anything you say go awry. In this early hour, keep me recursive the impulses to lose my feet. I'm yet overcome. You seismic drop, you sovereign fade. Oh, black chaos, I'm in study at your center. Turn me out. Go-go music, if you don't know, it's an indigenous music to DC. That maybe we can talk about later. I don't know. West 177th and Broadway. All night you eyed the man I wanted to be. My jaw flexed tight. Anger slipped into desire. Easily he would rise. Easily you would disperse. Pleasure made into light. What you want under him I put on to amuse. I, your worked supplicant. Yes, love is looking away. My desire greened and your dismissal was technicolor and twilight made and never turning off. The city air hung humid above our charade. What need I could feel to transubstantiate, to unravel. Art movie. Red is a secret in the trees. The train passes through the trees in Alabama. Red earth, red earth. The winter light consumes the field. The light silvers, the light relieves. The light thrown as dust upon the field. I put my ear in. I crack an egg, and a saxophone that tells on me, yells at me, comes out. No yoke. The train hollers to stop. The train stops, still loads new passengers, but the conductor won't let me get off and kiss you. You know that's what I haunted to do. The stage is the window circle between us, the emergency exit door. I keep you in my ear and give you how I'm doing and what I want to eat were I not on a train. You and your white boots. You tell me what else could come out of an egg? Women all the way down, holding waists. The train is a place going by, strictly passing through. I touch a stranger's wrist going back to my seat. The whole train becomes a garment I put on. I touch indiscriminately. I can't stay, I tell the dog, waving from your convertible. None of the windows open. I held your gaze until I couldn't. In the previous scene, I took you to the slip until we were tunnels for sound. I took your sound from my name, never asked what I called myself. How about I read two more? Sophia Small, is that cool? All right. Black existential exegesis. This engine and cog business is wigged out. I want nothing we're owed from the ship gig, thence the land whereon modern sound weaned off our cowrie and cached aged conjure. Land whereon our woe is chic and wanted. Shout out to every nigga cajoled into winging it in a crowd, crowing about being the hewer and the hewer's subject. Oh, my aching chore choir due upon our ochre echo throughout this land, this cadence gag, our ego greeted upon and caged. Grace is our odd crowd which encores green and geodes. Shout out to every nigga dodging age by ignoring human genre fiction gore, ergo we're nowhere, reneging on being owned and renewed, weighing nothing like race. Shout out to every nigga eroding off the edge of something else, gossiping in the air. I'll just finish with this one. Eighth and Ingraham. I forget about money, watching the clouds over 8th and Ingraham. The clouds, a rhubarb colored ship in the sky. To my right, it all grays out. The bats emerging now from the chimneys. The bats listening for the cicadas' echo. Echo is a way to create space, is a metaphor for time. Time for the cop to move along. I think watching the cop watch me from my porch. Fuck 12. The robin on the wire vine, the wire eye competing with the bats for cicadas, the robin competing reds with the sky, a money for the cicadas, a way to make space, time. The cicadas sounding out the future through repetition. A friend says to spend nothing is to keep flexibility in your hands, to keep your youth. Money, the sound of decay. Money, the repetition of waste. I'll stop there for now. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much. That was really pretty stunning. I want to start, I guess. Could you just hold up that photograph one more time? Because the version of your text I've seen didn't have that incredible photograph on it. Do you want to
Yeah.
say something about Dina Lawson and your relationship to that photograph and that work?
For sure. Trap Car is a photo that's been with me for a few years, just in my mind and in my creative process for some time. But also, her Dean Lawson's art has been with me for more years than that. And when I heard her speak for the first time at the conference at Princeton that we were at, Simone, and she said this thing of how can I use this edge, meaning like the the kind of oddities of the mundane living in another word, and I thought about that and just how I don't know there's like a vibrancy to her work that I don't find anywhere else, and I really connect with that um, in the domestic space. That I think is just really striking, and so I asked for you know, when I had an idea about my book, I thought about this photo, um, and she was gracious enough to say yes, which was such an honor for me, for real. Um, yeah, and my grandparents, my grandfather, he drove a Lincoln Town Car, which is not this vehicle, but it reminds me of it. Um, and yeah, when I look at it, I think of them. I think of him. Um, yeah.
Thanks for telling that story about your grandparents who do appear in Inheritance
Yeah.
several times.
Hmm.
Um, I was wondering, I'm going to ask you because there are some lines that stood out so powerfully in the middle of poems, and I just want to know: are these the second to last poem? Is that in the book?
What's it called?
I can't remember the title of the second to last poem, but it was so powerful, and I couldn't immediately bring it up. Does anybody remember what it
Is it
was?
called Similes?
I think so.
Okay.
The second to last one.
Yeah.
And then another one I want to ask you about later. I just want to make a note of it so I
Yeah.
don't get to talk about it. The one that I know is in the book that has the line, I lived alone and did nothing for a period.
Yeah. Bologna Blue. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to hold those two poems for like talking if we can get to it later.
For
But
sure.
the first thing I wanted to say, and Sophia, I want you to jump in whenever you want to, is you have like an incredible ear for first lines. And I was thinking about a couple of poems in particular, Club 2718
Hmm.
and the Black Proletarianization.
Hmm.
Um, can you just say a little bit about how a poem begins for you, how you kind of approach initially, because it really seems to me that those first lines are products of meditation and
Hmm.
a space opens up and you have the line. Can you say something about
Yeah.
that?
I mean that's absolutely right. I think that Club 2718. The title of the poem is a real club in DC. It's kind of like a I would say like 60 and up, 55 and up club that I used to walk past a lot, and there was an allure that I sensed from this space for years, and just kind of wanting to be a part of something that I already felt like spiritually engaged with. If that makes any
Mm,
sense. I feel like sometimes like relatively like anachronistic in my being or in my social life. So there is a level of me that was like, yeah, I probably should be within that space. But if they look at me and like, man, you look like you're 15. What are you doing up here? You know what I mean? So I used to just kind of pacing down this one street, Georgia Avenue, and a lot of my poems are like they're very kinetic. They're very peripatetic in that way, and they move around because I'm moving around. And a lot of the poems are written post walking.
mm,
Um, and so for that one, yeah, I think that I wanted something to open up within me so that I could be recognized in this space. You know what I mean? So in the world of poem making, that is this alternative space. I opened that world to myself, and that's how the line came through. And then
mm,
for the other one, Black Proletarianization, that's from Black and Blur by Fred Moten. Um, the title, I was in study with a friend when the book came out, and Fred Moten says the Black proletarianization of the bourgeois form is X, Y, and Z. He goes on to say whatever he says, and I was like, that's like kind of circuitous in some way. Like I wanted to know what that meant, and my friend was like, "It's like Kanye West using gospel samples in his music," and I was like, "Okay, that makes some kind of sense." And I sat with it for maybe like 2 minutes, and I was like, "No, that's incorrect." And then I wrote the poem. And so I thought about. I think I was in like upstate New York, right, writing this poem. Kind of in relative solitude, and I don't really care for aboutness in that way. Like I don't really care um, for aboutness, but the emotional resonance of the poem did hit me in a moment of like deep study with my friend, but also solitude and thinking about how I got to the particular moment I was in, if that makes any sense, how my actual body had been in this particular, wonderful, idyllic setting in the woods, what had made it possible for me to be there, in other words. Yeah.
Yes. Mhm. So that actually does lead to the place of the Bologna poem a little bit, where the line about you lived alone and did nothing. Can you just like go back to those couple of lines? I think it would be great to hear them again if you don't mind.
Yeah. Okay. So in the fourth stanza, or I guess third, maybe that's why I can't express want I what, two words strung together. Maybe that's why I lived alone and did nothing for 3 years. Loneliness is an aspect of human authorization, verbal egotism. Our right to understand stillness, not to praise. To name is to please. Should I keep going? So yeah.
You could stop. I mean, I was just thinking about the aspect of society or community that's coming out of your poems for me,
Mm-hmm.
which is really complicated. Sophia and I both wrote about um, the poem, I think, with which the book opens, which is the poem. You guys will help me out because for technical reasons, I have to look at you and the poem on the same computer.
Yeah.
But the poem that begins with the boys riding down Pennsylvania Avenue, I think it's called Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast.
Pennsylvania
right?
Avenue Southeast, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's an incredible poem because it really defines the physical limits of how you're working, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like thinking about the quadrant that is DC, and the ways in which you are, positioning yourself, looking around, being in a space. And I wonder if you could, what is the word? Speak to the question, of being alone versus having this sense of kind of calibrating who you are, what you are, where you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's really present all the time, like even up until that moment where you talk about the bats and the cicadas. That's another instance of it for me, like
Mm-hmm.
where you're not saying like they saw me and I, but it's a very, very similar movement for me.
Yeah. I do feel like the landscape of DC is its own speaking agent in these poems, and I think that's just through what I picked up in my feet. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I do believe that a lot of the poems and a lot of my practice as a writer, I guess, is to be in deep observation, which is, I guess, a kind of meditation. And I really don't speak a lot. I don't, and maybe this gets into just like who I am as a person, but I take a long time to come to words around people, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
I'm definitely an observer, and part of that is because I have like a relatively logical or analytical mind that kind of beats up against this like emotional need to connect on a like a abstract level, I guess, or to deduce some kind of uh, like character connection to people. I don't know if this makes any sense, but when I see like in Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast, for example, I think that what the eye, you know what I mean, what the visual is doing is trying to find himself in the world. You know what I mean? I think that's something that I'm always trying to do. I'm trying to connect on a more intuitive level with people, you know. And I think this poem, uh, the eye caught itself in a moment of connecting on a visual basis of like, you know, this is how this speaker could be hailed in the world as this kid who they're watching go by. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Um, and I think in a lot of the other poems, in particular in the one you just mentioned, Ethan Ingraham, there's the mention of like the wire eye, the wire vine. Um, I think, you know, one debilitating aspect of living in DC for so long is like this deep paranoia. You know what I mean? There's so much like government and you know, like being within a seat of power in this way, and it's really corrupt country. You know, it does a lot to you. So, oh, what's up, Kat? That was really
I know
sweet.
I tried to put her out, but
Oh,
my
she's wonderful.
in.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, yeah, that's where it is. I don't know how far like you want to get into like you know the personal stuff that really you know trigger a
That's
lot of
up
these
to
things.
you.
But
I mean,
yeah,
you. I'm. A lot of people are on YouTube waiting to hear it. So it's up to you.
yeah, yeah.
But that poem is so powerful, and so I would I can I'm ready to hear whatever you want to tell us.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, in that poem in particular, I think you know I always tell people I don't really believe in gender. I think gender is like your way of being in the world. You know, I'm Taylor, you are Simone, you are Sophia. You know what I mean? That is your particular incarnation and existence in this life and on Earth. But I think we've been assigned certain things. You know what I mean? And throughout my time of being here, I've tried to unlearn a lot of those things, knowing that some of those things have still been placed upon me. And in
Mhm.
that moment, I think that there was part of myself that was recognizing something that I saw, which is a limit, an emotional limit, um, enacting itself. You know what I mean? And I wanted to interrogate that, and so I did in the poem. Yeah.
I want to. There are a couple of questions coming up in the chat, and I want to though just give Sophia, who has paid so much careful attention to your book, a chance to jump in here if you would like to. No pressure.
Um, I I guess listening to this conversation right now and your mention of like observation, I'm even more interested in like some of the structural decisions, specifically like the intense sonic expectations that you managed to set up in a lot of the poems, like even the one we were just talking about, Pennsylvania Ave Southeast. I feel like there's so much like internal rhyme and connection, but also contradiction. And I think it's so interesting that you've managed to weave all of that into a poem that was founded on observation. So I guess it's not really a question. I could phrase it like a question, but that's where my thoughts are at the moment. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I'm in that poem. I think you know my sense of music and my sense of like rhythm in poems is deeply influenced by go-go music, which is the indigenous music that comes from DC that is very percussive and very much a call and response kind of nature. So some of that you see in the poems, and I think there's a level of like polyvocality that I'm trying to translate, and I'm not always very. I don't know if I always succeed at it, but I do believe that the poems kind of allow me to operate on many different vocal registers and levels of sonic resonance. You know what I mean? Um, yeah, and I think even like I was saying before, I think that the trying to reach like some kind of emotional um, resonance with these people I was observing, I think that the internal rhyme kind of goes to you know make that possible, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does. Call and response seems like a perfect phrase to encapsulate what I was trying to explain sonically.
Yeah, I mean, in go-go music, the audience is a member of the band. You know what I mean? So, uh, there are people performing, but you're also on stage in a way, you know what I mean? And I was talking to someone about my book, and they were like, well, I don't know if I'm always let into the world, you know what I mean? And I said, well, I don't know if that's like necessarily on me, like I don't know if that's on me. You can be at the go-go and you can just stand on the wall, or you could jump in the front and like go with the cowbell, you can go with the timbales, you could call out your neighborhood, any of those things, you know what I mean? So it's your level of entering into the room with me, or standing outside and just kind of overhearing. Yeah.
So I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, pull out a couple of the questions that have come and invite more questions to arrive. So this question is from Heidi, and two questions from Heidi. One is Black existential exegesis, that they're referring back to this phrase. I wonder, is the existentialist theme in your poetry influenced by existentialism as a philosophy, or more like food and a space relationship with the self?
Hmm. I think it is. A lot of the poems are written like in response to different theorists I was reading. I don't like yeah, I can't pinpoint for you like specifically who I was reading in all the poems, but I know that a lot of the ways that I process knowledge is through writing poems in this way, and some of them were written with that in mind. And in that particular poem, I think it is more of a relationship to the self in space. Yeah, and like maybe like you said, like a mood. Yeah, yeah. But I think that there's a level of that too. I sometimes I hesitate in calling things like this is a poem. You know what I mean? This is just these are my thoughts. These are like this is my response to this particular uh, interview or piece of theory. Like I said with the Fred Moten Black and Blur thing, I was responding to my um, misunderstanding my friend. You know, yeah.
I could ask you more about it, that poem actually, but I'm gonna
Mhm.
ask, I'm gonna go to the second part of Heidi's question, which is I also wonder about film as a visual setup for the poem. I find evocations of movement. When you imagine a camera's gaze or a poem as a film, or when you call to film, what kind of films do you mean?
Mhm. I think about Bill Gunn, Charles Burnett, Kathleen Collins. Yeah, and there's one, and I'm forgetting the guy's name. Maybe Psycho Symbiotoxoplasm. Do you know this film? Okay, it's this black guy. It was done maybe in the 50s, early 60s. He is the auteur, you know what I mean? And he set up these different screen tests where people have to say a line. It's a couple, a man and a woman saying a line of like some kind of, they're in some kind of fight together. And the guy whose name is escaping me right now, which is really unfortunate because it's a wonderful project and there's like multiple parts. Anyway, they try to do it in like 2010. Yes,
Like
Bill
30
Greaves.
This is
Thank you,
a
thank
30
you.
minute long film.
Huh?
This is a 30-minute, it's a very short film.
No, no, it's not.
No?
It's a little long. Yeah, but it's Bill Greaves. The Sophia put it in there. Yeah. William Greaves. Yeah. Um,
Thank you, Sophia.
yeah, appreciate that. That's a good call. Yeah, that slipped my mind. Yeah, but there's a way in which I like that style because he's being filmed while he's filming these people being filmed, and then he also has this moment where he's his crew, so the people who are filming and doing the sound and all that, they're being filmed, and the conceit maybe is that some of them know that the film is trying to get at this idea of like what does it mean to be in your particular position? What does it mean to be a director? What does it mean to hold a camera? All these things. And so I think about that film in particular because the eyes are everywhere. There's like this kind of not violent panoptic, but it is a kind of panoptic look at this idea of personhood and being amongst others. And I get a lot from that film. But also Bill Gunn is like he's a poet, so I love the work of Bill Gunn too. Yeah.
We have another one from the public, which is, this is more of a simple question, but what would you say is your favorite aspect of your poetry? There's so much to love. That's so sweet.
That's really nice. That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
My favorite aspect, I guess, in the moment of creation, I like the feeling of being inside a poem. I don't know if that's necessarily how you wanted me to answer that question, but I do like um, entering into a world that is being enchanted by language in a certain way and creating a world out of it. I like that aspect a lot. Yeah.
Mhm.
I actually had a question about you mentioned inside a poem. I was actually curious about in this collection in Inheritance the interiority versus exteriority, and whether or not this collection like in these poems, whether that boundary collapses or
Mhm.
is it being reaffirmed. And I think
Yeah.
of a line actually from Lincoln Town Car, which you mentioned earlier, the I counted the pines and put my voice inside them. And I've been trying to sit with that line and wonder if like what's going where, like what's inside and what's outside, and is the
Mhm.
point to dissolve that difference, that binary, or
Absolutely. Yeah, the point is to dissolve it. Yeah. Um I don't really think that there is a separation between me and what I'm around. You know what I mean? I try to take on the things that are around me. And sometimes that's like the natural world. Um, and so in that poem in particular, I think it is about dissolving my particular individuality. And then again, some of that is also from like this kind of go-go aesthetic of dissolving the self in favor of the crowd of sound, that I'm trying to go for as well. Yeah.
Somebody's saying that they'd like to hear more about hear me say more about the exegesis poem. You might have to wait until you read our little essay.
Cool.
um, I wonder, there's somebody saying thank you. There's such a hypnotic atmosphere in the poem. That's also part of the performance of the poem, I think.
Yeah.
Poems. I wonder, did you, in your initial performances of these poems, what was your, how did they feel when you were reading them when you first started to read these? How did they feel? Because it's one thing to be, especially I hear you saying you're writing these poems as you're walking, and then you come to the poem, it's kind of there waiting for you when you return, studying, you thinking, you're working things out through the poems. And I wonder what it felt like to voice them then after
Yeah.
you,
It's interesting. Um, the first time I read most of these poems was at Princeton, was at that
Mhm.
thing that where I met you. So that was interesting because I hadn't really shared these poems until that point. Um, and there was a way in which I was well, first of all, I was very nervous. I was very nervous because Simone White was in the room, you know what I mean? And then also Fred Moulton was in the room, who like appears in some of these poems. So that was like, it was a wild thing for me. It's a very surreal experience. But there's a way that the poems kind of speak ahead of me in a lot of ways, you know what I mean? And then hearing them in a room with people, I'm able to hear my intentions reverberated back to me in some way. I think that in the process of creating them, um, there is this level of like, okay, this is my, I'm doing this thing, with words that is of my own doing, and I'm not necessarily going immediately and being like, hey, read this, friend or whatever. Uh, so there is a level of like, I don't know how this is going to sound to other people. My expectation when I write anything is not to be read or to be heard. It is purely for my study. You know what I mean? I think it just so happens that I've continued to walk in a certain way that my poems are able to live in the air as well as on the page.
I'm quiet because I'm wondering, um, yeah, poems living in the air is a very interesting thing to think about. I'm gonna say, Sophia, you wanna jump in one more time? And then actually I was thinking, Taylor, about maybe reading like one poem as we think about wrapping up. Could you, I
Yeah.
just hear one more poem as the last word, but maybe Sophia, and this is the last call others, also to others, if you want to ask final questions. I wish I could see you all, those of you who are on the YouTube channel, because even in the strange Zoom universe where, you have sometimes 50 squares, I can't even see that when we're live streaming to YouTube. So I don't know who's out there. So if you're out there and you have something to say, this is the moment in which to bring that. Sophia, you want to say something more?
I don't have another question. But I having listened to what you just said and like poems existing in the air, like preceding even you, I think that's so interesting to think about when you see how these poems appear on the page. Because that I feel like that's kind of how they appear on the page with like space and structure. Maybe that's just a plug for people to get the book so they can see it themselves. But yeah.
I mean, people should definitely get the book, but, but also, I just there is so much happening, and the things that I'm actually writing with Sophia right now. That one, I'm sort of just like taking little chunks of your poems and just trying to sort of write towards or into those things, including the problem of the Black proletarianization of the bourgeois form.
Yeah.
Um, and thinking about the ways that that's resonating with a certain impossible domestic who is in a Fred Moten poem of 2008.
Right.
Um, uh, and just thinking about the way your voice is, both, I don't know how to call it. It's like it's coming both out of, a community of people who are talking to each other as poets right now, but also some of the things I swear that are happening in your poems I've never heard before, and I find it very exciting. And this is what I was referring to when I was saying, what's happening in that Bolaño poem where you start talking about being alone and doing nothing. Those are untraceable aspects, I think, of your work that I'm very excited about. And, I'm really, really curious and excited to see what's going to come. Share the book link, please.
I can find one.
And if you want to choose, they shared the book link.
Okay, cool.
Okay, great. And if you, Taylor, maybe want to choose 2 more poems to go out with.
Great. Should I do the Similes one? That's the second to last one.
Your choice.
Okay, cool. Similes. Nothing is like jail. Nothing resembles it or approximates it. Nothing is like being detained except for being detained. Nothing is slower than time. Then time is measured between who you were before being handcuffed and who you'll be stumbling out the jail onto the small town street with no one to talk to. Who you'll be is measuring each breath that isn't metallic air. How is the air after the bruise on your rib? It's nothing like air. Nothing is like being alone when you shouldn't be alone. Alone is the fear of being watched and not speaking for weeks. Nothing is like a cage but a cage. I tell this to myself, knowing where I've been, knowing where I have to go. Then I'll read this one. Yeah. Trans is against nostalgia. Every day I build the little boat, my body boat, hold for the unique one, the formless soul that blew fire, that coaxes my being into being. Yes, there was a music in the woods, and I was in love with the trees, and a beautiful man grew my heartbeat in his hands, and there was my mother's regret that I slept with. To live there is pointless. I'm building the boat the same way I'd build a new love, looking ahead at the terrain, and the water is rising, and the generous ones are moving on. Oh, new day, I get to build the boat. I tell myself to live again. Somehow I made it out of being 15 and wanting to jump off the roof of my attic room. Somehow I survived my loneliness and throwing up in a jail cell. Oh, new day, I've broken my own heart. The boat is still here, is fortified in my brokenness. I've picked up the hammer every day and forgiven myself. There is a new language I'm learning by speaking it. I'm a blind cartographer. I know the way, fearing the distance. Oh, new day, there isn't a part of you I don't love to fear. I'm holding hands with the poet, speaking of light, saying, I made it up. I made it up.
Thank
Cool.
you so much. I'm so grateful that you came,
Thank
and
you.
I'm so grateful for this new work. Um, there's a question saying when and where will this essay be published? It will be, look for a review of Taylor Johnson's Inheritance in the Poetry Project newsletter. Should arrive. I think this one will probably be out in January. I think it'll be the January newsletter.
Cool.
So this was fun. I like this
Thank you,
sport.
Simone.
Let's do this again.
I would love it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sophia.
Oh, thank you. This was
Yeah.
awesome.
It's like really cool to hear both of your attention, to the poems, and I'm still so new to them myself. You know what I mean? I think that poetry, the publishing time is so crazy. You know what I mean? It takes a while for something to happen. So there's a way that like I am a whole new kind of person since these poems have been written, and then since they've come into the world. You know what I mean? And some of that is ahead and some of that is behind, you know what I mean? So there is a way that these poems are continually teaching me things, so I'm equally in a place of coming to know what they're doing alongside you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that concludes our actual broadcast. If those of you, including Sophia and Taylor, will just stay on the Zoom for 1 second. Good night, everybody. See you soon. Take care.